The last hope. In the farthest corners of the galaxy, darkness was spreading. It was not a darkness of space, but a wave of destruction, one that no one had ever seen before. The stars, once bright and full of life, were now flickering out, one by one. Alien civilizations that had once thrived now faced the end. A massive energy wave, invisible yet deadly, was consuming everything in its path, and no technology, no strategy, no wisdom could stop it. Planets were being ripped apart, and their inhabitants, helpless, watched as their worlds crumbled. Desperation was in the air, and with each passing day, hope seemed to fade. The greatest minds of the galaxy, once full of confidence, were now reduced to mere shadows of their former selves. The galaxy's leaders, from the peaceful Illyrians to the warlike Zargothians, gathered in secret, hoping for a miracle. But no plan they devised worked. The energy wave was too powerful, too unpredictable. It moved too quickly, and all efforts to stop it had failed. Every system, every defense, was useless. At the center of it all, a council of alien leaders sat around a large table, their faces grim. Desperation filled the air, and the weight of failure was heavy. "There is no way out," whispered one leader, an elderly Illyrian whose once bright eyes were now dull with sadness. "We are doomed. Our time is over." But then a figure entered the room. His footsteps were firm, and his presence immediately commanded attention. He was human, a man from a distant world. His name was Captain Eric, and he had come from Earth. His people, the humans, were known as the Deathworlders. The galaxy knew little about Earth or its people, and what they did know was terrifying. Earth was a planet full of dangers, wild beasts, harsh environments, and deadly diseases. Yet humanity survived, thrived, and spread across the stars. Unlike any other species, the Deathworlders had learned to survive in conditions no one else could. "I've heard enough," Captain Eric said, his voice calm yet strong. The leaders of the galaxy turned to look at him. "I know you all think it's over, that there's no way to save yourselves, but I'm here to tell you something you don't want to hear. You're wrong." The council was silent. The words hung in the air, and no one dared to speak. Humans have survived what no one else can. If you want to save your people, if you want to stop this wave, you'll have to learn to survive like we do. Not just survive, but fight. The room erupted in murmurs. The idea of humans, Deathworlders, offering solutions seemed impossible. How could these fragile beings, who came from a planet full of danger, possibly have the answer to save entire civilizations? Captain Eric continued, "We don't rely on technology alone. We rely on our will to live. Our survival instinct is unmatched. If you want to survive, we need to change the way you think, the way you act." One of the alien leaders, a tall, imposing Zargothian named Krell, stood up. His sharp eyes narrowed. "You think we can just think our way out of this? We've tried everything. Nothing works. You're just one human. What can you possibly offer?" Eric met Krell's gaze without hesitation. "I offer you hope. I offer you survival. And I offer you a chance to change the future." His words were blunt, but there was a certainty in his voice that no one could ignore. The room fell silent once again. The alien leaders looked at each other, unsure of what to think. Their pride had been wounded. To accept help from humans seemed like an insult. But what choice did they have? A younger alien, a female Xilorian named Lyra, stood up. Her bright green eyes met Captain Eric's. "What is it you want from us? You say you can help, but at what cost?" Eric's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "I'm asking you to trust us. Let us show you how to survive. Let us teach you what we know. We won't do it for you. But if you want to save your people, you need to learn what it means to be a Deathworlder. And that starts now." The galaxy's leaders exchanged glances, the weight of their situation hanging over them. They were on the edge of extinction, and the humans were offering the one thing they had left: hope. After a long silence, Krell, the Zargothian, spoke again, his voice low but clear. "Very well, Captain Eric. We will give you one chance. Show us what you can do. But know this, if you fail, we will never trust you again." Eric nodded. "I don't plan on failing." As the leaders left the council chamber, a sense of uncertainty filled the room. Could humans really save them? Could the Deathworlders turn the tide against the unstoppable wave of destruction? The answer seemed uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, hope stirred in the hearts of the galaxy's people. Maybe, just maybe, the Deathworlders were the last hope they had. And so, the fate of the galaxy rested in the hands of the humans, whose strength and will to survive had made them a legend across the stars. The question was no longer whether they could stop the wave. It was whether the galaxy's civilizations could learn to fight and survive alongside them. The first steps toward survival had begun. First contact. The galaxy's leaders stood in shock. They had seen the humans land on their worlds before, but never like this. Never with such certainty, such confidence. Captain Eric and his team of Deathworlders stepped off their ship, their boots clicking against the barren ground of the council's meeting place. They weren't just humans. They were something different. They were survivors, warriors, and their eyes gleamed with the knowledge of 1,000 battles fought and won. The alien leaders, once brimming with pride, now felt small under the weight of the Deathworlders' presence. Eric stood tall, towering above many of the aliens with his broad shoulders and steely expression. He wasn't like them. He didn't come from a world of peace or advanced technology. He came from Earth, a planet that had taught its people to survive against the odds. The Illyrian leader, a wise and graceful figure named Tessa, was the first to speak. She had seen many things in her long life, but never anything like this. You're not like us," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "Your kind, your way of life. It's unlike anything we've known." Eric's gaze was steady, his face unmoved. "That's exactly why we're here. You've lived in comfort for too long. But now, the universe doesn't care about comfort. It cares about survival." The Zargothian leader, Krell, who had previously been skeptical, crossed his arms and narrowed his eyes. "And how exactly do you propose to teach us to survive? Our technology is centuries ahead of yours. We control the stars. We can destroy entire fleets with a single command. How can your people, weak and frail, even hope to stand against this force?" Eric's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. "It's not your technology that will save you, Krell. It's your will to survive, your instinct. What you've forgotten is that survival isn't just about power, it's about adaptability. It's about using your mind, your strength, your courage. It's about fighting when everything tells you to give up." The alien leaders exchanged glances. Some were hesitant, others intrigued. Lyra, the young Solorian who had spoken up before, took a step forward. She was quick-witted and clever, but she had never been forced to fight for survival the way humans had. "You talk about survival, but our worlds are falling apart. The wave of destruction. We've tried everything. Every weapon, every defense. There's nothing left. You can't possibly be telling us we can survive by simply fighting." Eric's eyes darkened as he nodded solemnly. "You can survive, but it won't be easy. The wave is coming for all of you, not just your technology. It's not a war. It's a test of everything you've ever known. You'll need to change everything. The way you think, the way you fight, the way you survive. If you don't, if you keep relying on your old ways, you'll die. And the wave won't stop at just your worlds. It will consume everything. But if you're willing to adapt, to learn how to survive like we do, then you can save us," Lyra finished, her voice quieter now. It was clear she was beginning to understand. The humans weren't offering a quick fix. They were offering a transformation, a complete shift in the way the galaxy's civilizations viewed their survival. Eric turned to the other leaders. But we're not here to do this for you. You have to want it. You have to want to survive, even when the odds are impossible. If you're not willing to make that change, then there's no point in us even trying." There was a tense silence. The leaders of the galaxy had always prided themselves on their intelligence, their power, and their technology. But now, for the first time, they faced a challenge that none of their strengths could overcome. They had reached the limits of what they knew. The wave of destruction was something new, something beyond their understanding, and it was coming for them. Tessa, the Illyrian, finally spoke. "We are willing to learn. Tell us what we must do." Eric nodded slowly. "Good. We start with the basics. You've spent so long relying on your technology to solve your problems, but you've forgotten how to fight. I'll show you how to survive, how to face the dangers head-on, and come out alive. You'll be trained in the ways of the Deathworlders. Learn to adapt, learn to fight, and learn to never give up." The council hall was filled with murmurs of disbelief and curiosity. How could this strange group of humans possibly teach them what they needed to know? Yet, in their hearts, a spark of hope was ignited. Maybe, just maybe, these humans had the answers they had been searching for. Captain Eric looked over at his team. "We'll start tomorrow. Prepare yourselves. Your survival depends on how quickly you learn." As the alien leaders dispersed, the atmosphere in the council hall shifted. For the first time in a long while, there was a sense of urgency. The Deathworlders had brought something none of them had expected, something more valuable than weapons, more powerful than technology. They had brought hope. Hope that they could still fight. Hope that they could survive. The galaxy's civilizations were about to change forever. Survival in the Deathworld. The following day, the galaxy's leaders gathered in a desolate training ground, surrounded by nothing but barren rocks and harsh winds. The alien civilizations had all brought their most capable warriors and minds, hoping that they could quickly learn from the humans. But they had no idea what was coming. Captain Eric stood in front of them, his arms crossed, looking out at the group of alien leaders. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "This will be harder than you think," he began, his voice cutting through the wind. "Survival is not about clever gadgets or shiny weapons. It's about how you react when everything goes wrong. And trust me, everything will go wrong." The alien leaders exchanged uncertain glances. They had faced wars, invasions, and civil strife. But this was different. They were about to learn survival from humans, creatures who lived on a planet where the very environment wanted to kill them. It was a planet of danger, chaos, and ruthless forces of nature. "I'll start with something simple," Eric said. "The first lesson: you will face the elements. You will learn to endure the things your bodies aren't used to." He motioned for the group to follow him. The training ground was not just empty space. It was an artificial simulation, designed to replicate the deadly environments of Earth. As the alien leaders followed him, they felt a sharp change in the atmosphere. The temperature dropped, and within moments, they were standing in a frozen wasteland. Ice whipped through the air like daggers. Snow piled up quickly, and the cold bit deep into their skin. Some of the aliens, accustomed to more temperate climates, started to shiver, while others tried to brace themselves, but their bodies were unprepared. Eric stood unmoving, his arms folded across his chest. "Survive the storm. For the next hour, I want each of you to build shelter and find food. You've got nothing but the environment around you. Use what you have." Lyra, the young Solorian, shivered and glanced around nervously. "How are we supposed to build shelter in this? The storm will kill us before we can even get started." Eric's eyes locked on hers. "That's the point. You're not just building shelter. You're building your will to survive. The storm doesn't care about your plans, your weapons, or your knowledge. It's going to try to kill you, and you have to fight back." At first, the alien leaders hesitated, unsure of where to begin. But the cold, biting wind pushed them into action. They searched the barren landscape, their eyes scanning for anything useful. But the harsh conditions made it nearly impossible to see. It was a true test of their instincts, an experience they had never faced before. Hours passed. The wind howled, the snow piled higher, and most of the aliens were struggling to stay upright. The Illyrians, known for their speed and agility, had trouble adapting to the cold. The Zargothians, strong and resilient, found their thick scales offering little protection against the freezing temperatures. Yet despite the odds, they were trying. But none of them could do it alone. Lyra, struggling against the freezing wind, finally collapsed to her knees. She had been trying to gather materials for shelter, but the snow was too deep, the wind too strong. Her Xalorian species was not built for this kind of cold. Her breath came in sharp gasps, and she felt her body beginning to give way. "I can't do it," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Just then, she felt a presence beside her. Captain Eric was there, his face determined, but his gaze softening as he saw her struggle. Without saying a word, he knelt beside her and began to work. He didn't offer any advice or promises. He simply worked. He found a fallen tree trunk half buried in the snow. He used his knife to cut it into pieces, his movements precise and practiced. It was clear he had done this 1,000 times before. He didn't need to be told how to survive. He just did. Lyra, exhausted and freezing, stared at him in awe. How do you know what to do?" Eric paused, wiping the sweat from his brow despite the cold. "Because I'd had no other choice but to survive," he said simply. "Survival isn't a choice, it's instinct. It's what we do. Humans don't have the luxury of expecting someone to come save them. We save ourselves. And right now, that's what you need to do too." Lyra nodded slowly, a fire igniting inside her. She wasn't sure if she could make it, but she knew she had to try. She picked herself up and started working with him. Together, they created a makeshift shelter from the snow and ice. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to survive. Around them, the other leaders struggled in silence. It was hard. It was painful. The elements were ruthless, and their bodies screamed for warmth. But as the hours passed, they began to realize something. The storm wasn't the real enemy. Their own limitations were. They had grown soft, reliant on their advanced technologies, their machines, their comforts. But here in the cold, with nothing but their bare hands, they began to understand what it meant to truly survive. By the end of the day, the alien leaders had built their shelters, though many of them were far from perfect. Their bodies were bruised, frozen, and exhausted. But there was something else in their eyes. Determination. They hadn't been broken. They had endured. As night fell and the storm raged on, Eric sat by the fire, watching them. "You made it," he said. "You've taken the first step. It's not just about surviving the storm. It's about surviving everything life throws at you, no matter how impossible it seems." Lyra, her face pale from the cold, but her eyes alight with understanding, nodded. "We've only just begun." Captain Eric smiled, though it was a rare sight. "This is just the beginning. Surviving Earth's dangers will be nothing compared to what you're about to face. But if you can survive here, you can survive anything." The alien leaders, cold and exhausted, huddled together by the fire, feeling for the first time the burning, unyielding spirit of the Deathworlders. They had started to understand that survival wasn't just about power, it was about heart. And with that, they knew they might just have a chance after all. The great test. The harsh winds of the Death World had stopped. The ice storm that had tested the alien leaders was now a memory, but the lessons they learned were still fresh in their minds. The group sat huddled around a fire, their faces gaunt from exhaustion, their bodies sore from the brutal training. Captain Eric didn't offer words of comfort or congratulations. He simply watched them, studying their expressions. The fire crackled in the silence, a reminder of the burning determination that still simmered in the hearts of the survivors. "Today, you will face something worse than the storm," Eric said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. The alien leaders turned to him, their eyes filled with curiosity and dread. Today, you will face a real test. The wave that is destroying your worlds. You've only seen the surface of it. Now you'll face the heart of it. The room fell quiet, and the air seemed to thicken. The alien leaders, their nerves raw from the storm, knew that whatever Eric had in store for them would be unlike anything they had ever encountered. This was the moment they had been preparing for. They had learned to survive the cold and to adapt to the dangers of Earth, but this test would be different. This was no training exercise. This was a trial that would push them to their absolute limits. "Follow me," Eric said, standing up and striding toward the door. Without hesitation, the alien leaders followed him, their minds racing with questions and doubts. They had faced the storm, but what would they face next? They traveled for hours across barren terrain, where the air was thick with the scent of burned metal, and the earth seemed to have been scared by some unknown force. The ground was cracked, as if something had torn through it, leaving a vast wasteland in its wake. Captain Eric led them to the edge of a massive canyon, its jagged rocks towering high above them. At the bottom, a river of molten lava flowed, sending waves of heat rising into the air. "This is where it begins," Eric said, his voice steady. "This is the heart of the wave, the core of the destruction that is sweeping across your galaxy." The alien leaders stared into the canyon, their eyes wide with disbelief. This was no ordinary disaster. It was a force of nature unlike anything they had ever encountered, and it was spreading. "What do you expect us to do?" Krell, the Zargothian, growled. His deep voice rumbled like thunder. "We don't have the power to stop this. No one can." Eric turned to face him, his expression unwavering. "You're right. You don't have the power to stop it. Not alone. But that's why you're here. You're going to learn how to fight back, not with your strength, but with your mind, your instincts, and your ability to adapt. The wave is only as powerful as you allow it to be." He gestured to the canyon. "Your test is simple. You'll enter the canyon, navigate through the dangerous terrain, and reach the core at the bottom. Along the way, you'll face obstacles, each one harder than the last. You'll have to rely on everything you've learned so far to survive." There was a murmur of disbelief among the group. The canyon was deep, and the molten lava below it posed an unimaginable danger. Yet something in Eric's words ignited a spark within them. They had come this far. They couldn't back down now. "We'll go together," Eric said. "But make no mistake. This is your test. Your survival depends on how well you adapt. The canyon won't care if you're a leader, a warrior, or a scholar. It won't care if you're an Illyrian, a Zargothian, or a Xalorian. It will only care about one thing, whether you can survive." The group stood at the edge of the canyon, their gazes fixed on the fiery river below. Some of the aliens were already doubting themselves. The Zargothian, Krell, flexed his powerful muscles, clearly frustrated. "This is madness. There's no way we'll make it." "Then stay behind," Eric said flatly. "But I won't stop." With that, Eric leaped from the edge, landing on a narrow rock ledge below. The alien leaders hesitated for only a moment before following him, one by one. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the canyon walls, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had trained in the freezing cold. They had learned to work together. But this was a new challenge, a trial of their will, their unity, and their ability to think under pressure. As they descended into the canyon, the temperature rose dramatically. Sweat began to bead on their foreheads, and the air grew thick with the stench of sulfur. The molten lava below sent a constant heat wave that made it hard to breathe. But they pushed on, driven by the knowledge that this was their only chance. Each step brought them closer to the core, but also closer to the point of no return. The first obstacle came quickly, a massive rock slide that blocked their path. The aliens stared at the pile of jagged rocks, trying to figure out how to move past it. Some of them began to panic, their thoughts racing. But Captain Eric was calm, his eyes scanning the area. He saw a narrow passage on the side of the slide, hidden by the rocks. "This way," he called, his voice steady. It was a tight squeeze, but they all managed to climb through, their bodies scraping against the rough stone. As they emerged on the other side, they found themselves standing on a thin ledge, high above the molten river. Below them, the lava churned like an angry beast, ready to consume anything that came too close. "We move fast. Stay close," Eric instructed. His tone was sharp, but there was no fear in it, only purpose. The next challenge came when they reached a vast chasm, a rift in the canyon floor. The gap was too wide to jump, and the only way across was a series of unstable rocks, suspended over the molten river. It seemed impossible. The Zargothians, with their strong legs, leaped first, but the others hesitated. One by one, the alien leaders followed, each step a careful calculation, each movement an exercise in trust and survival. Halfway across, the rocks began to tremble. One of them, unstable and crumbling, broke loose and began to fall. Lyra, the young Solorian, screamed as she reached for it. But Eric was there, grabbing her arm just in time. He pulled her to safety with a strength that was surprising for someone so seemingly frail. "Keep moving," he ordered. "There's no time to stop." They reached the bottom of the canyon, their bodies bruised, their minds exhausted. But they had made it. As they stood before the core, they realized the lesson was clear. The wave that threatened their worlds was not an unbeatable enemy. It was an obstacle, just like the canyon, just like the rocks and the lava. It could be defeated, but only if they worked together, adapted, and never gave up. Eric turned to them, a look of approval in his eyes. "You've passed the test, but remember, this is just the beginning. The real challenge is learning to fight like this every day, against every enemy, no matter how impossible the odds." The alien leaders, battered and bruised, nodded in understanding. They had faced the greatest test of their lives, and had survived. The heart of darkness. The canyon had been nothing compared to what lay ahead. After surviving the brutal tests of the canyon, the alien leaders and Captain Eric made their way to the final destination, the heart of the wave's destructive force. For days, they had journeyed across treacherous terrain, crossing rivers of molten rock, climbing craggy mountains, and braving unforgiving storms. But now, they were standing before something more terrifying than anything they had encountered before. They had arrived at the source of the wave. A massive blackened crater lay before them, its edges smoking and shifting, as if alive. It pulsed with an eerie energy, one that seemed to tug at the very fabric of reality. The air was thick with a strange, oppressive force. The molten ground bubbled and churned like a boiling cauldron, sending strange, glowing streams of energy in every direction. Captain Eric stood at the edge of the crater, his eyes scanning the scene with cold precision. The alien leaders stood behind him, their faces pale and their bodies tense. They had come this far, but none of them truly understood what they were up against. All they knew was that they had to stop it, no matter what. "This is where it ends," Eric said, his voice low and unwavering. "The wave isn't just a natural disaster. It's an ancient weapon, one designed to consume everything in its path. It feeds on the energy of entire star systems, draining the life force of everything it touches. But this isn't just a force of nature. It's something created, something made by beings long forgotten." The alien leaders exchanged uneasy glances. Lyra, the young Solorian, spoke up, her voice trembling. "How do we stop it? How do we even fight something like this?" Eric turned to her, his expression hard. "We don't fight it head-on. That would be suicide. What we're going to do is something different. We're going to shut it down from the inside. We're going to destroy its core." The Zargothian leader, Krell, let out a skeptical grunt. "And how do you propose we do that? We're not gods. This is beyond our abilities." Eric's eyes narrowed, his gaze burning with a fiery intensity. We may not have the power of gods, but we have something far more dangerous: our determination, our ability to adapt, to think, and to survive. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us the last hope. The alien leaders exchanged looks of uncertainty, but one by one, they nodded. They had come this far. They had survived against all odds. And now, they would face their greatest test. The group carefully made their way down into the crater, each step a calculated risk. The ground shifted beneath them, crackling with energy, and strange, glowing veins of light pulsed through the air, making it feel like they were walking in a dream. The air was thick with a strange hum, like the sound of 1,000 voices whispering all at once. Finally, they reached the heart of the crater. At its center was a massive, towering structure, an ancient black obelisk. It stood impossibly tall, stretching into the sky like a jagged needle. Around it, the very air seemed to warp and twist. The energy in the air was palpable, thick with a dark, oppressive power. It was clear to them now that this was the source of the destruction. The obelisk was not just a structure, it was a weapon. Eric stepped forward, his eyes locked on the obelisk. This is it. This is where the wave begins. If we don't destroy it, the galaxy will fall. All of your worlds, all of your people, will be gone. Krell growled, his massive frame tensed with barely contained rage. Then let's do it. Let's destroy this thing. Eric nodded. We have to be careful. This isn't just a simple machine. It's alive. We'll need to destroy the core without triggering the full force of the wave. One wrong move, and everything could be lost. The group began to move around the obelisk, scanning for weaknesses, looking for any way to disable it. The energy surrounding it was so powerful that it made their heads spin, and the closer they got, the more their bodies felt drained. It was like the obelisk was feeding off their very strength. "This thing is draining us," Lyra said, her voice strained. "We can't get close enough." Eric looked up at the obelisk, his face grim. "Then we'll have to fight through it. There's no turning back now." They were close, so close to the core. But the closer they got, the more the energy seemed to intensify. It was as if the obelisk was fighting back, pushing them away, pulling at their very essence. Captain Eric's heart raced, but he didn't stop. He had trained for this. He had survived countless battles, countless dangers. He wouldn't back down now. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. The obelisk began to glow, the energy around it spiking wildly. Eric's eyes widened. It's reacting. It knows we're here. Without warning, a wave of energy shot out from the obelisk, knocking them all off their feet. The alien leaders scrambled to regain their balance, their bodies shaken by the blast. The air crackled with static, and a low guttural hum echoed through the crater. Krell roared in anger, his muscles bulging as he charged toward the obelisk, his claws outstretched. But Eric held him back. "No, don't rush in like that," he shouted. It was too late. The Zargothians' charge sent another pulse of energy from the obelisk, this time far more intense. The force sent Krell tumbling backward, slamming into the ground with a deafening crash. His body lay motionless, and the group rushed to his side, fear flooding their hearts. Eric kneeled beside him, checking for signs of life. He's alive, but barely. We need to move quickly. But it was clear that the obelisk had grown even more powerful. It was feeding off their fear, their pain. And the wave of destruction that was sweeping across the galaxy had just intensified. "We have no choice now," Eric said, standing up. "We're going to have to destroy it before it destroys us all. Are you ready?" The alien leaders, battered and bruised, nodded. Their eyes were filled with determination, no longer just a fight for their own survival, but for the future of the galaxy. They knew what they had to do. It wasn't about strength. It wasn't about technology. It was about the will to survive. And that, they had learned, was something that no weapon, no force, could ever defeat. The turning point. The air in the crater was suffocating, thick with energy that seemed to vibrate through their bodies, making every step feel like a struggle. The obelisk towered before them, a dark monolith pulsing with a malevolent force that drained their strength. It was not just a weapon. It was a living thing, an ancient entity that had been designed to consume and destroy. And now it was feeding on them, their fear, their desperation, their very will to survive. Captain Eric stood tall, his eyes locked on the heart of the obelisk. His pulse raced, but there was no room for hesitation. This was the moment that would decide everything. They had come so far, across harsh landscapes, through brutal tests, facing unimaginable odds. But now they stood at the threshold of the galaxy's survival. It was no longer about individual strength or technological might. This was about something far greater. "This is it," Eric muttered to himself, more to steady his own nerves than anyone else. "We have no choice but to destroy it now. If we fail, it's the end." Lyra, still visibly shaken from the earlier attack, stepped forward, her hands trembling. "What do we do? It's like it knows us. Every move we make, it reacts. We can't get close enough." Eric's eyes narrowed as he scanned the obelisk, his mind racing for a solution. "We've been fighting it the wrong way. It's not just a weapon to be destroyed. It's a creation, an ancient force that thrives on energy, on emotion. We've been attacking it with force and technology, but that's what it wants. That's how it feeds." Krell, still nursing his wounds from the previous blast, stood beside Eric, his voice gruff but determined. "So what, you think we just walk up to it and offer it a truce? We're not dealing with a sentient being here. It's a machine, a weapon." "No," Eric replied, his voice steady. "We're not going to fight it. We're going to outsmart it." The alien leaders looked at him, confusion and skepticism written across their faces. Eric could see their doubts, but he knew he couldn't afford to explain every detail. They didn't have the time. "You've learned to survive the harshest environments. You've learned to adapt. Now it's time to apply that. The wave is powered by energy, yes, but it's also driven by fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of failure. It's fed by the belief that there is no way out. The moment you stop fighting and start thinking, that's when we can turn it off." Lyra was the first to understand. Her eyes widened as the pieces clicked together. "You're saying we have to stop fighting it with force and start fighting it with our minds. We have to control our fear." Eric nodded. "Exactly. We've been afraid of it from the start, and it has sensed that. It's not invincible, but it thrives on our fear, our desperation. If we can turn that off, if we can stay focused and strong, we can break its hold." The group stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling in. This wasn't a fight they could win with weapons or brute force. They had to overcome their own fear and self-doubt. The energy from the obelisk seemed to pulse around them, suffocating their thoughts, but they had to push past it. Krell let out a deep growl, more to himself than anyone else. "I've fought in 100 battles. But this is different. It's not just a weapon we're facing. It's everything we fear." Eric's eyes softened slightly, understanding the Zargothian struggle. "We're not just fighting a weapon, Krell. We're fighting the belief that we can't win. And that's what the wave wants to control. It wants to make you believe it's unstoppable. But it's not. It's just a force, and we can beat it." Lyra took a deep breath, her green eyes bright with newfound clarity. "Then let's stop letting it control us. We've faced the worst already. What's left to fear?" Eric gave her a nod, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Exactly. You've survived the worst. Now, let's finish this." The group began to move forward, slowly approaching the obelisk. The air seemed to hum with energy, but this time, they didn't flinch. Each step was deliberate, each movement controlled. They no longer feared the force of the wave. They embraced it, understanding that it was not an enemy to fight, but an obstacle to overcome. As they reached the obelisk, Eric placed a hand on its cold surface, feeling the pulse of energy beneath his fingertips. It was like touching the heart of the universe itself, powerful, raw, and alive. He closed his eyes, focusing his thoughts. He could feel the fear trying to creep in, the doubt, the overwhelming sense of helplessness. But he pushed it aside, concentrating on one thought: survival. "We've faced worse," he whispered under his breath, as if reminding himself. "We've made it through everything, and we're still here." One by one, the alien leaders gathered around him, placing their hands on the obelisk. They had been trained to survive the harshest conditions, but this was different. They weren't just fighting for their own survival anymore. They were fighting for everything they had left: their worlds, their people, and the future of the galaxy. Lyra, her eyes closed in concentration, whispered the words she had never thought she'd say: "I'm not afraid anymore." And as the group stood together, their hands resting on the obelisk, a strange, pulsing light began to emanate from it. The energy around them seemed to shift, the pressure in the air lessening, the oppressive hum beginning to fade. The wave, the force that had been destroying everything, started to lose its power. Captain Eric opened his eyes, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "It's working." But then, as if on cue, the ground beneath them shook violently. A deafening roar echoed through the crater as the obelisk erupted in a burst of energy, sending shockwaves through the air. The pulse of destruction flared to life, fiercer than before. The group staggered, their grip on the obelisk loosening, but they refused to break. "This is it," Eric shouted above the roar. "We have to finish it now. Hold on." The energy crackled wildly, but now it was not just a destructive force. It was something they could control. The group focused, fighting through the pain, refusing to let it overwhelm them. Together, they forced their will upon the obelisk, pushing against the tide of energy. And in that moment, they realized something profound. The power of the wave wasn't infinite. It had been driven by fear, by the belief that it was unstoppable. But they had learned something far more powerful: the power of unity, of defiance, and of the will to survive. The obelisk shuddered one final time, and then silence. The energy faded, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. The pulse of the wave was gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, they could breathe again. The victory. The silence that followed the wave's collapse felt like a deep breath after holding it for far too long. The oppressive energy that had filled the air was gone. The ground beneath their feet no longer trembled with the fearsome power of the obelisk. Instead, there was a stillness, a peace that they hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. It was as if the universe itself had paused to reflect on what had just occurred. Captain Eric stood before the obelisk, his eyes scanning the now silent landscape. The massive structure that had once pulsed with dark energy was now dim, its surface cold and lifeless. He exhaled, feeling the weight of the battle they had fought and won. "We did it," Eric whispered, though the words felt too small for the enormity of the moment. Behind him, the alien leaders were still catching their breath, their eyes wide in disbelief. Lyra, the young Silurian, stepped forward, her voice filled with a mix of awe and triumph. "It's over. The wave. It's gone." Eric turned to face her, his expression somber but satisfied. "It's not just over for you. It's over for all of us. We've done something no one thought was possible. We've beaten the impossible." The Zargothian leader, Krell, who had been wounded earlier in the journey, stood with the rest of the group, a fierce pride in his eyes. His massive form was battered, his body bruised and scarred from the trials they had faced. But his confidence had returned. "I didn't think we'd make it. But now, I see what you were talking about, Eric. It wasn't just about power. It was about us. All of us, together. That's what made us strong." The other leaders nodded in agreement, their expressions reflecting a newfound understanding. The Illyrian leader Tessa, who had once doubted the Deathworlders' ability to help, spoke next, her voice firm and full of respect. "You taught us something we never knew. Survival isn't about strength or technology. It's about our resolve, our unity, our ability to adapt. You've made us stronger than we ever thought possible." Eric gave a brief nod, but there was no pride in his expression. "You all did it. Not me. You overcame your own fears. You learned to fight with your minds and hearts, not just with weapons." The moment of triumph, however, was fleeting. The crackling silence that filled the air soon gave way to a distant rumble. The sky above, which had been dark and stormy for so long, began to clear. A pale light bathed the crater, but it wasn't just the light of a setting sun. It was the light of something far more profound, something that had been missing for so long. For the first time, the galaxy felt alive again. But there was no time to celebrate. As the alien leaders gathered around, still catching their breath, they heard the faint hum of ships in the distance. Captain Eric's sharp eyes caught the movement first. "It's not over yet," he muttered, his voice low but urgent. He turned to the group. "The wave is gone, but its aftermath will be felt for years to come. We may have defeated this weapon, but there are still the scars it left behind. The people you've saved will need help. Your planets, they'll need rebuilding." Krell's voice rumbled with resolve. "We'll rebuild. We'll restore what was lost. We will not let this victory go to waste." Eric turned to face him. "It won't be easy. Many will have lost everything. Entire civilizations will need support, aid, and protection. You'll need to work together, every race, every world. The challenge now is not just survival. It's making sure that what you've learned, the strength you found within yourselves, doesn't fade." Tessa, the Illyrian, stepped forward, her voice steady. "We're not just fighting to survive anymore. We're fighting to build a future, together. We've seen the power of unity. Now we will make sure that power lasts." Captain Eric nodded, a faint smile appearing on his face. "Exactly. The wave was just one challenge. The future will bring others. But if you remember what you've learned here, if you remember how to survive, how to adapt, how to come together, nothing will be beyond your reach." With the immediate threat of the wave destroyed, the alien leaders began to turn their attention to the work ahead. The galaxy would not rebuild itself in an instant, but for the first time in years, there was hope. The alien races had learned something invaluable from the Deathworlders, something that would resonate far beyond this moment. They had learned to survive, together. As the sun began to rise, its rays casting a warm golden light across the crater, the group of survivors looked up toward the sky. The wave that had threatened their very existence was gone, and though the scars of its destruction remained, there was a sense of promise in the air. "This isn't the end," Eric said, his voice filled with a quiet strength. "It's the beginning." And as the alien leaders watched, they saw what he meant. A new chapter had begun. The galaxy had been saved, not by force, not by technology, but by the power of unity and resilience. They had learned the true meaning of survival, together.